Welcome to the History of the Wellers Company, presented by Gary Finke, August 23rd, 2022.
And of course the farmers all stood around and talked. And this is because it was a very slow operation. You took your truck up there and you could end up with a couple hours of wait to get the things unloaded. And you had to wait for them to dump your baskets of tomatoes and get your baskets back so you could weigh out, because they weren't going to let you weigh out and get paid for empty baskets. So you had to get your baskets back also to weigh out when you left. So you could be there 2 or 3 hours just waiting to dump. Obviously you can see that they were dumping by hand. All the baskets were taken out by hand, all the baskets were dumped by hand. Today they have semis and they don't dump the whole semi at one time. They don't have anything by hand. Then the tomatoes went up a conveyor where they had hot wire straight on to wash the mud and some of the other stuff off to clean the tomatoes up from the field. This is the first time they started handling, and you notice they had rubber gloves on the women there. They were taking the culls out. The ones that were split, you couldn't use a split tomato because they had mud or whatever on the inside of it. All that stuff was all thrown out on there, plus other vermin and critters that might be there from the field. Snakes, mice, whatever you have. But that's how they got rid of them. There's about 4 women up there because of another line on the other side. And they go through, and that's the first time they started getting rid of anything in the tomato. Okay. I do not believe this at all. Downstairs and upstairs, the women, and they were talking about a couple hundred people per shift. And they did the coring and peeling. They're using dish pans. And they're staying on wooden benches. The floors in there were wood. I was in the factory. I have no clue how they ever passed any kind of health inspection in the world. I have no absolute clue how they passed anything, because they had to have, from the stuff that dropped on the floor and everything, the floors were all wooden. The stuff that dropped on there, that the mice would come in at night and have a heyday, I guess. And the worst thing is, we know who everybody in the picture is. We do have some good stuff on as far as who people were. Most of you would recognize some of the people on there. Okay, to get the tomatoes down to tomato paste, or that after they were cored and peeled, they went in and this squeezed down and became smaller and smaller, and actually just squeezed the tomatoes into a tomato paste to go into the kettles for cooking. This is a bottling machine. They could bottle
140 a minute.
140 a minute. You can see the bottles up there going through, and then they were capped and everything. And they would be hot yet when they were bottled. They'd probably be 200 degrees when they did the bottling. After they cooled down, they had the label. But the labels were all put on by hand. I guarantee the ladies putting labels on could not do 140 a minute. That just wasn't a possibility. The labels were put on by hand. This is Joe Fleury, who's a chemist for Weller. And chemistry was very, very important. I found that out definitely. I tried to make ketchup. I do have a list of ingredients. The ingredients basically are a pumpkin spice based list of ingredients, which surprised the heck out of me. Plus there's cayenne pepper in it. I don't have the amounts and everything, but every batch of tomatoes that came in, and Ron Chimming said they took and mixed tomatoes from different parts of the county, so they got a mix of type of tomatoes what they had. They would have to do a check on the pH of the tomatoes and the sugar content of tomatoes, because that's the only way that they could get the amount of sugar and vinegar in accurately. You had to know how much sugar and vinegar to put in. And I know this is the way this goes because I'm used to doing apple boil, which is very similar to doing ketchup. Our method of checking for the amount of sugar is Roger Carpenter and Roger Veneer taste the stuff. As they're tasting it, they decide where they need 1 pound of sugar, 2 pounds of sugar, 3 pounds of sugar, or 4 pounds of sugar by taste. Well, couldn't do that for every batch. Plus, they were talking about having to add both vinegar and sugar, so you'd have to know that. Plus, their method of canning, so you had a consistent thickness of the tomatoes, they would actually have a thing where they would time the amount of time that it took to run through a definite thing. And our method of checking the apple butter is you take and put the apple butter on a plate, hold the plate up and see if it runs down. But they would have to be very accurate. So they had a lab. I was in the lab when they still had the building out there. I made the mistake. We didn't have the history room. There were things that could have been taken out of the lab that would have been very interesting to have here. I only took one thing out of the lab, and you'll see that later. But he was that, and they did testing for that and the amount of stuff that they had to put in. Plus they did testing for food and drug and everything for purity. You're allowed so many vermin hairs in your ketchup or in your pickle. And this is written in the stuff, and it's still in there today, that you can have so many hairs from mice or rats or cats or whatever. And they were loading on the railroad cars. This is the first time we've seen anything mechanical to load or anything else, but the railroad track back there. Anybody that went to school in the 50s, remember the train backing in with the stuff about noon? The steam engine going down, backing things into Wellers there about noon or so all the time. They used quite a few carloads of glass, plus they got their sugar and salt back then by railroad car. Okay, these are some of the beginning labels that we come up with for Wellers in the 50s and 60s. Vinecrest, I've never heard of. The other ones I've seen or heard of, but we've never seen that one as there. We've got it given to us, but we have no clue as far as what it was, where it went. Okay, these are all pickle. These are all pickle labels. They did have pickles that were labeled Wellers, but I never ever saw a Wellers pickle jar that I remember. All the stuff I remember was Pure Gold for pickles. Okay, this is tomato Huffman House. We got a bottle over there from Huffman House, and I didn't find this until about 2 weeks ago. Okay, this says J. Weller and everything. Go up now. It'll say Huffman House. We come down here to this, and these are from Helly's. This one has a barcode on it, and this one actually says Helly Farms, Oak Harbor, Ohio. And I didn't see that till a couple weeks ago. And you have one up there that basically could have been military or something like that, because it's a nondescript label, but it has a barcode, so that would be after the barcode came in. Okay, Weller did ketchup for a lot of big companies. Kroger's was one real big one. They did a lot of ketchup for Kroger's. They used Kroger's recipe for doing the ketchup. That much I do know. Kroger's had their own recipe for the ketchup, and they cooked it. And they did a lot of stuff for Kroger's. Red and White Supermarkets was a fairly good sized chain in Ohio at that time. We had one here in Oak Harbor, and there was one out by the Pink Elephant and everything out there on the corner with a Red and White grocery store out there. Byrite was Byrite Food Town. Later on became Food Town, Seaway Food Town, which was based out of Toledo. Food Town stores were all over the area and everything, and they did for Food Town. Now, Piggly Wiggly, this is actually out of Florida. They actually shipped their ketchup and everything to Florida, and Piggy Wiggly, that could be what they were loading on the railroad cars there when they were loading stuff out of the railroad cars to actually go to Florida. Okay, these are some of the other labels that we had. A bunch of them out of Pennsylvania. We had Edwards, Avondale. Anybody could actually go in and bargain with OL and get 1,000 bottles of ketchup made with their own label, or 2,000 bottles of ketchup made with their own label. What they used for a recipe, I have no idea. It was probably a generic recipe that they made that was basically all the same. Okay, the only one I know here for sure, Monarch Foods. The Monarch Foods out of California, and Monarch basically was commercial food stuff. I remember the cafeteria and things in Oak Harbor School getting Monarch can, number 10 cans of stuff, and large bottles and everything else, but that was basically a commercial group that you had. They didn't sell to stores. These other two were basically sold to stores or store chains, it'd be like a small store chain. Now we got some that I really like. We got a ketchup called Why Pay More Tomato Ketchup. You have Table Mate, which again you got some strange things, and then down here you got Big Top Ketchup. And if you notice it, when you look at this, they're very colorful labels. When you I kind of like those two on the Big Top of Why Pay More. I never even saw anything similar to that. Okay, these are the pickle labels. On here we have one label, all the rest you know. Bellevue was not a Weller brand. OL went together with the head of Gibson Canning, which was in Port Clinton, and they bought a canning company in Sandusky. They named it Great Lakes Canning. They bought out Bellevue, which was over by the Bellevue area in Clyde, and they packed under that name. They did pickle, kraut, and pumpkin. I don't have any idea whether they ever did ketchup. The only thing I found in the papers was pickles, kraut, and pumpkin. In 1962, George Werger, who was the president of Gibson, died, and his son ran it. That's the last they saw of the company.
What year?
The guy died in 1962, and that's the last I found it in the paper. It was in the paper when they had the company, and when he died and everything, and who ran it, and then it disappeared and never showed up in the papers again. So I have no clue what happened to Bellevue Pickle. But that was a thing with OL, so you had another thing tied in, and you have no idea what, they may have canned stuff here for Bellevue, I don't know, I have no clue. Okay, this is a Jewel Tea. And I just put that up here because it's kind of interesting. Jewel Tea was a truck that went around and went to houses and sold stuff, all kinds of things like ketchup and that. And I happen to know the person that drove the Jewel Tea truck in Oak Harbor was Cletus Axe, and he lived near me on East Main Street. If anybody knew Steve Axe and the Axe girls, it was their father that drove the Jewel Tea truck. And that was canned for Jewel Tea out of Illinois, that you end up with a picture, label like that. Okay, this is what the federal inspection sheet looked like. I have no clue how many baskets the inspector would pull. If you notice, they use the same sheet for tomatoes or pickles. They just cross the pickles out and put tomatoes in. Okay, tomatoes, you had either number 1 or number 2 tomatoes. Pickles, you ran from 1 through 5. Some of them were graded to some degree at the pickle stations, and the pickle inspector would grade them as to how many you had of each one in the baskets, and they would come up with a percentage of what you had in the baskets, and then they would multiply it out by the prices they were paying for the different types of stuff. And this stuff down here was done for the people in the office. He did the stuff up there, and what was wrong with the tomatoes, if you had anything wrong, decay, discolored, cracks, sunburn, whatever, as far as anything that was rejected. Okay, this is one of the shipping labels. And it's very interesting what we found down the bottom. Pickles in glass, all varieties, were guaranteed for 6 months from the date of shipment. Ketchup and chili sauce were guaranteed for 1 year for the date of shipping. Anything after a year or 6 months, forget it. You could have ketchup like that and they do nothing. So what the guarantee was for the Wellers on bottles in the bottom when they shipped it. This was a picture of the tomato batch or pickle batch when they had it in and before they put the lid on. Now, we have part of a lid in the history room over here, one board from the edge of the lid that I happen to procure. I also have boards and everything else, and a whole bunch of boards from the pickle batch also. The pickles were piled up, and after they went down a little, how long did it take before you put the lids on, Ron?
If you filled the tank that day, you put the lid on that night.
And then you had boards go down and hold them on. You had to water the inside of the barrel to swell them to make them watertight.
Yeah, we ran a sprinkler system because we had to dump every tank and then manually scrub, clean. John got to see the sewage for the leftovers, and then we put the sprinklers in and water the tanks, soak them back up, and then we put brine back in the tank, load them with X amount. Every tank had a recipe, how many pickles went in per barrel, and that's what you put in it. And then you put the lid on, and then it took that much more salt to add in with the brine to have it set. And normal was 30 days plus curing, start to finish.
See that picture of the pickle yard way back, and you can see what the barrels look like. If you're not careful, you got a barrel down there, that some of them would fall apart at times and everything. I happen to have one of these in my barn when they took the fats out and everything and took the things out. Happened to be the balcony storage up above that's in my barn that came from Weller's.
There was catwalks in between every row of them tanks, and they went front and back. And I think the far back of the picture where the houses are, that appears to be the machines that took the pickles out back there.
That's right there.
They just called it a dipper, and you stood there and you netted the pickles out of the tank.
Okay, there's a picture of them canning the pickles. This was in the 60s yet, and they're still doing it by hand. They still do it by hand nowadays for spears and whole pickles. There's no way that you can put so many pickles in with a machine so far that they come up with that you can get pickles put in. Chips and pickle rice and things like that, not hard to put in, but individual pickles are kind of hard because they're all different sizes. Okay. This is transplanting the tomato plants. The seedlings were grown, and then they had to transplant the seedlings into boxes that were used on the planters. And they had women come in and they transplanted all those seedlings. And you had seedlings like this that went into the cold frames out in the cold frame yard. There's a picture of the greenhouse. I don't remember it. John doesn't remember. Is there anybody here remember the greenhouse being there? I don't remember the greenhouse being there.
We remember the
I remember the cold frames, I don't remember the
Right.
greenhouse.
Yeah.
We don't remember the greenhouse.
I remember the cold frames, and there's the cold frames that they had, a whole yard of cold frames. That's all the pickle yard up there. The cold frames were towards the street, and way down at the end is Four Metal. And these are jars that you would probably remember, and some of the different brands again. And this was not the round bottles that you had later on. These were still the ones with flat sides on them. Okay, these are, I don't remember any pickle jars. We don't have any pickle jars here that are that size pickle jars. Most of them were like this. Pickle jars down there, what we've got out here are that size. Okay, these gentlemen were the first gentlemen basically that were given that started the pickles in 1897. They were recognized in 1961, the 50th anniversary of the Well Company. But these were the first ones that they had that sold peppers, and the one down here donated pickles for the plant the first year. I haven't figured out the donating pickles, not getting paid for them. But they basically had pickles the first year that Wellers was here.
Do you know why they came to Oak Harbor?
We have no clue other than it was a good area to grow tomatoes and pickles.
You also had a very active businessmen's association back then in the early 1900s in Oak Harbor, and they were constantly going to other places and other towns and stealing the industry to bring it up here.
But constantly we're number one, number two in the state in producing tomatoes and pickles in Iowa County. It was just unreal the amount of pickles and tomatoes. The thing that kept Iowa County going during the Depression was pickles, tomatoes, apples, peaches, and pears. We had a storage for vegetable fruit right along between Iowa Street and Main Street. There were long barns in there, and one time they stored like 50,000 bushel worth of apples in there to be shipped out. We actually had a icing station that would be on the north side of Iowa Street along the Norfolk and Southern tracks, but they actually iced down refrigerator cars there to ship apples and everything out. My grandparents had an apple orchard and a pear orchard, and 1 acre of pickles, or money you got out of 1 acre of pickles equaled 8 acres of wheat. So the pickles and tomatoes paid far greater than what other crops paid, and then their wives and that worked in the plant. So basically, the vegetable crop kept Iowa County going during the Depression and the canning. Okay, this was recognizing the workers. OL gave all kinds of watches and money awards and everything else to his workers. He was very, very good with the workers that he had, and very generous with what he was giving out to workers. And they came back and worked for him. I'm not sure if I was a woman, I'd want to sit on those wooden benches and peel tomatoes all day long for 10 hours a day. I just don't think that would be I peeled some tomatoes to make 4 pounds of ketchup and it wasn't fun. Okay. The next thing we had that came up was the swimming pool. In 1964, the swimming pool, this is Aaron Kyle, we actually know who it was, a girl by the name of Aaron Kyle. OL wanted to build a swimming pool in the park. The only thing he wanted was to have it named Teagarden Pool. O'Carver Council refused to let him build a pool there and name it Teagarden Pool. So OL decided that he would turn part of the area between Jefferson Street and Washington into his own pool. And he had the pool in there, and he built everything. It was free. He gave swimming lessons for free, care of it and everything else, just for the spite of it. A 30 by 50 swimming pool that he built for the town, and it's all free.
If anybody's got other pictures of the swimming pool, we'd like you to bring them in, because this is the
That's
only
it.
picture I've ever found of
That's
a swimming pool.
What year was that?
This was 1964. They tore it down, filled in 87. It was filled in 87.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, OL, and I haven't figured out what, OL had been a big supporter of the O'Carver Fall Fair. Fall Fair was uptown from the 30s till 1963, and in 1963 he filed with the state to have them stop letting O'Carver close Water Street down for the Fall Fair, which ran from a Thursday through Saturday, so they had the street closed down while they set rides up from Wednesday, so they closed it down for about 5 days, closed the street down to traffic. And he filed with the state so that they would not be able to close Route 163 down, which basically stopped the running of the Fall Fair. Now, the Fall Fair, they had the cattle barns and that, and sheep and everything were out in the park. The first barn was built out there in 48, but the armory and the town hall were used for displaying the dresses and all the other things. The canned goods and the apples and all the things that grew was displayed in the town hall and the armory. And basically they shut down the stuff for everything but the animals for the Fall Fair. And that basically ended up the last year they had the Fall Fair. As the Fall Fair was 1963 in town. And then they put the fairgrounds out on 163 out by County Home.